Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whenever you're listening. I can't believe it, but it's already sixth episode that we're recording from London, and I'm here back again with
Lucia. Hello, guys. I'm becoming a regular host. I love it.
a regular host, of course. And today we have a really special guest, a professor from Hult postgraduate, Alex, who we're going to talk about disruption with. Now, Alex, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
I wanted to ask you, what is disruption?
Yes. Well, firstly, let me just say it's a real pleasure to be here and talking to everyone on this morning, afternoon, and evening. Disruption, I suppose, literally it means to take something apart, to dismantle something. And I think in business terms, it's really trying to reflect the constant world of change in which we now find ourselves. And I think it's also a misleading term, if I'm honest. I think it sort of implies that one of the challenges with disruption is it kind of implies there will be a period of disruption followed by a period of stability. And I think that's kind of a model for change that we've had for a long time, that we'll go through change in order to get to stability. But I think the evidence suggests that that's not the case anymore. And actually what we're seeing is just a constant process of evolution. So there is no disruption. Disruption is the new constant. So it's no longer disruption. It's now just the way life is. And I think, so we almost need to move away from a paradigm of disruption and more towards a model of managed evolution.
So essentially it's just change happening all the time.
Yeah, and I also think a challenge with that is to see change not as something that comes externally and we are forced to do, but also something that we choose to do.
Okay, interesting. And would you say we have to do?
Well, I think on an individual level as individuals, to some extent, yeah, we have to adapt to the world the way it's constantly changing, or you get left behind, obviously. But I think as businesses, yes. As businesses, we are in a position where if you do not innovate, you will die. That is true of every business anywhere. There is no alternative to that. Even in the most fundamental businesses, commodity businesses, digging copper out of the earth or coal, there are new ways to do it, new ways to market it, new ways to go to market, new challenges, new distribution methods. No matter what you're in, you are in a position of constant innovation. And if you do not, you will sooner or later cease to exist. Look at loads of examples of that. Look at Nokia, BlackBerry. If you are not a driver of innovation, then you are a victim of innovation, and you may or may not survive that position, but you have to make the change. And if you don't, sooner or later, then your business will cease to exist, for sure.
Do you think, sorry,
Go ahead, Lucia.
do you think this constant pressure for driving of innovation, changing and evolving can cause a backlash in companies and result in going the wrong direction?
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? You've got to be constantly changing, but of course you can change wrong, can't you? You can make a bad decision and go in the wrong direction. And so judgment becomes very important in that. But also so does a different culture in business, and that is the key there. Because there is a backlash. People don't want to change. I think human nature is that we kind of like things to stay the same. We like to.
That would be the ideal constant.
We like to know what's going to happen today, and I think that's just the nature of humanity. So we are almost in a position where all change is not for everyone, but certainly for some people, is regarded as a sort of suspicious thing, and you don't feel comfortable. So yes, you can easily get a backlash, and for leadership of change, it is how you manage the organization to accept a constant state of evolution, and that is just a huge change culturally for most organizations from where they are now, for sure.
It's really interesting. I had a question. Would you say disruption can go backwards? Like, can companies change backwards, go back to how they were, or use systems that were present maybe a couple hundred years ago, even thousands of years ago? Maybe people used it, or would you say this could be the case?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there are real examples of that. Look at vinyl records, right? There are real examples where, vinyl records were a sort of analog form of music storage, and was replaced by digital music and CDs, and that was just going to be the future. And then now CDs have pretty much ceased manufacture, and vinyl is increasing again. And I'm sure lots of the listeners here will have vinyl records at home and enjoy vinyl records. So for sure, yes. I mean, I saw a thing about wind power, of how we can now reintroduce wind power into shipping. Wind power that was replaced in the sort of late 19th century or mid 19th century by steam power, which was then itself replaced by diesel engines and so forth. And now, of course, we're starting to say, well, actually, in this new sustainable world in which we
solar
live,
panels.
yes, maybe wind power will help us to cross the Atlantic, and solar panels and so on. So we are revisiting old technology and old ways of doing things. But I don't think you replace them in the same way. It's not as if major shipping lanes are going to suddenly start, erecting big square sails on wooden ships. But in a more modern way, you can take those old ideas and repurpose them into something new and different. And I absolutely think you can, I wouldn't exactly call it going backwards, but you can certainly look at what was before and repurpose it to something new, yes.
I mean, this question really dwelled from, we had a thought with some of my co-founders, because I also run a company, like I mentioned to you. And we're really just trying to bring back the bartering economy to fashion in order to achieve like 100% circularity. And we were thinking like, hey, we really need to go backwards, how this was thousands of years ago, Mesopotamian era, where 6,000 years ago they were just trading and they didn't actually have a currency yet. And it was a service for service, product for product. And it's kind of what we're trying to achieve. So it really just came where the question came from.
I mean, all the issues around bartering they're not, I mean, currency is a notional form of bartering. It is an asynchronous form of bartering, in effect. And in doing that, what's grown up around that whole concept is taxation, essentially, right? Yeah. So the challenges around bartering aren't really, in terms of bartering per se, because currency is, after all, just an asynchronous form of bartering. It's creating value that you can then exchange later. The challenges around that are all around how you then tax it and what happens to society if we turn into a bartering society.
That's so true.
But that's in the age of disruption. That's often the way things go. So you look at one thing and you say, well, we could do that, but then there are a whole lot of knock-on effects that then have to be understood, and the sort of ripple out of that change. Then, now we have to do this, and now we have to do that because of that change. Look at the greatest change probably in the last few years is COVID, right? Yeah. So COVID happened. And obviously that was a huge change in terms of the pharmacological industry, in terms of how, people's lives and education, all these things. But then there was this ripple effect of, for example, the breaking down of corporate boundaries, because people work at home and they don't want to go back to the office, not full time. So then the corporate boundary of who works for us and who doesn't, and when they work for us. Okay, I'll work for you, but I'll work in a different time zone. I want to go live in Buenos Aires. So I will work for you 9 to 5, but I will be out of your, not in your time zone. And then I've got a side hustle as well. And then I've got another thing I do and another thing I do. And COVID has had this kind of remarkable effect of accelerating this process of breaking down corporate boundaries. And that is a ripple effect of a change that nobody probably saw coming, but is probably, in pure business terms, the greatest impact of COVID.
Actually, I've seen I'm from Spain, but I did high school in Miami, and I actually ran I was manager for a business, like a small little business for dog care and stuff in my neighborhood. And I noticed that most of our clients were coming from New York and working in Miami remotely. And they would constantly talk to me how they didn't have enough time for their dog anymore, because now that they worked remotely, they felt like they had so much more, not free time, but they were able to do so many other things at the same time apart from their job. And that was also causing disruption within their workplace, because they weren't putting in 100% focus in their actual 9 to 5, because they were now doing a podcast, or they were now doing a side business of their own clothing brand.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice example, because we're living in the side hustle economy, aren't we? We're living in the situation where everyone has something else that they do as well as work. And
because they have to a lot
because
of the time. Yeah.
partly it's being forced, partly it is the opportunity to work
Yeah.
at home. And as you say, maybe more time with your dog, but also more time, to do that, to be a DJ at weekends. We're not traveling as much to and from work, so that time you can put to something different and more useful. And I think from an organizational point of view, from a leadership point of view, it is understanding that change, that actually my organization is no longer boundaried by strong, firm lines of who works for me, who doesn't, where they are at any given moment. Actually, it's more about collecting together the right group of people to take on this particular challenge, and then it might be a different group of people for the next one. And an organizational ego of leadership needs to kind of adapt to that actually you may not have a giant office and your staff, arrayed in front of you, working away and looking up to you. Actually it may be very different. It's very difficult on Zoom or Teams to kind of assert that kind of egotistical authority that leaders might be used to, and they're going to have to get used to a different way of thinking about that.
Do you think remote work has helped for the better, the overall culture of a corporate office or just productivity itself?
I do, yeah. I mean, what do you think?
I think it depends on the person and how they work and their work ethic. Because I definitely know some people that have just gotten into corporate world and they do it completely remote, and they feel like they don't have to put in as many hours, or they feel like they have more time to separate their task. And that's just how they work. That's their work ethic. And then I know people that they thrive off of the routine of going to 9 to 5, going to the office, sitting down with their coworkers, being table to table, and being able to talk to the person next to you about maybe a problem that you're having with a certain task.
And then there's also the mix of people. I mean, I personally work a blend of some of it I work at home, and some of it I do on campus whenever I work. It's really just like having that personal connection with the people, not just seeing them through Zoom. And then also having somebody that is like overlooking you, that you're actually doing your job. I feel like you kind of lose that whenever you're actually online. I mean, what do you think about this?
I do. I think you're absolutely right. It's down to the personality. I think one of the challenges of working mixed is, in London anyway, that kind of forces you to live close enough to the office to come in, which is expensive, but then you're working home some of the time. So given that the accommodation is expensive, it's often quite small, and then maybe you're sharing it with other people, and you're also working at home, and it's the combination can actually be quite difficult to make work, I think.
And the distractions as well, whenever you
But I also think there's an assumption that people sometimes have about office life, that in some way, if you're in the office, you're working. And actually, that's not really true. There's an awful lot of sitting around, chatting to people, and every meeting lasts an hour, and maybe you get through the actual content of the meeting in 25 minutes, and you've got another half an hour just chatting to people, And I do think that office life is not as it's not as diligent as sometimes it's sort of implied to be compared with working at home. But yeah,
it's really this notion of this meeting could have been an email.
Yeah, exactly. And that's virtually every meeting, isn't it? Really,
unless it's really important.
A few.
Well, yeah. I mean, I asked you the question of disruption at the start, and we never really got into. Like, people who are listening to this might be like, who is this Alex guy? So can you tell us a bit more about like your background? How did you get into this, and what sectors you're part of too, actually?
Yeah, so I, before I was here at Hult, I was an executive in business. So I started out in the tech industry and worked in the tech industry in a variety of roles, and then moved a little bit into the sort of media and agency side. And then came back into tech, really, and worked for a long time for Microsoft. And then became vice president of marketing eventually for Pearson Group. And so, all of that was very much a sort of leadership, executive, fairly traditional kind of thing. And I realized, I suppose, it goes to the core of what we're talking about in a funny kind of way, which is disruption. I realized that actually my internal disruptor was becoming more and more interested in the study of business and the sociology and philosophy of business, and a bit less, to be honest, in the execution of business, which wasn't to say that I hadn't really enjoyed doing it. I had a long, a couple of decades of doing that, and it was great, and I really enjoyed it. It's just I evolved a little bit individually and thought, actually I'm interested in how business works. And I also I realized I was much more interested in the people around me and how they progressed and how they, I was so keen to see them develop. And I guess it's sort of, I don't know, almost a sort of parental feel of like, I want to see them grow and take on those challenges in the future. And it just seemed a natural way to go, to say, well, actually, I'm going to move on from executive life and into a more academic life as a professor. And now I'm here. And thrilled that I made, it's the best decision really for me at that time. So
That's really cool. I mean, I can certainly see the reason why you would maybe go for Hult. Did you start off with Hult?
I actually, because I worked for Pearson has its own little sort of side hustle of its own.
Pearson College?
Which is.
I did apply for that one.
Right. Okay. So I actually did a bit of teaching there first, and while I was still working there, and kind of took on some responsibility for that as well, and then. Started doing a little bit of work at Hult a little bit later, and then it's a transition and of life, and you want to be sure you're making the right decision. But I just loved it so much, I couldn't wait to take it on full time. So
great. So Hult is quite disruptive. I see why you would go for Hult for sure.
Yeah. Well, having spent so much time in the tech industry, Hult actually kind of reminds me culturally of that a little bit. The kind of desire to change, to be useful, to not just get set in your ways, to not just do the same thing that we did last year and the year before, but to do something different. And I think Hult really exemplifies that aim.
Would you say it allowed you to maybe disrupt in a way, like maybe disrupt the lives of students who were willing and eager to learn about this?
Yeah, in a nice way. You want to, one of the great things about this job that I do is watching students come in at the beginning, and they say things like, "Oh yeah, I want to go into consulting or something," and that's great, or whatever it is they want to do. And then by the time they leave, they're like, "No, I'm now running a startup in the clothing industry or something," or I've decided to become a fashion PR, and you're like, "Well, that's fantastic, that's awesome." I was talking to someone just the other day who went into business who left sort of Hult with one intention of going into actually what's fashion PR. And she ended up in this kind of statistical, business analysis role because she just decided that, she took such a passion in that area. Not that she was a statistician, but that she saw the sort of data visualization as being very interesting and challenging. So you see, I think that's the disruption of Hult is in our students' lives, is whatever they come in thinking, they leave off, not always, but often with a different direction, a different path, which is fantastic.
Cool. I had a question prepared for you as well.
Go on.
Which was, since you worked with Hult, whether that is with the students or the leadership at Hult, what were some of the strategies that you could maybe see that were successfully implemented that Hult maybe did a bit differently to other institutions, other businesses?
I think that one of them is, for example, its response to COVID, I think, was a real example of that, which is to say, actually, we are not. This is, of course, a global tragedy and a huge negative impact on a lot of people's lives. Let's not diminish that in any way. But from our students' point of view, we want to give them as much continuity as possible. We want to give them a great experience, and we want new students to see us as, even in COVID, and of course we have no idea how long it would last or what the consequences would be at the time. We want to make sure that we are well set up for that new world. Now that's an external change, right? That's something forced upon you, but you still respond to that. I think the more important area of disruption is also where you start saying, well, what can we change? How are we the disruptive force rather than something being external? And I think there's a lot of examples of that at Hult, but I think one would be in the postgraduate world, the kind of city seminars and things like that, where we'll take on an industry and a city and say, actually, we're going to look at a particular industry where in a particular city, which is key to that industry, and we're going to do a week there, and we're going to build some partnerships and invite our students to go, and that'll be a 1 or 2 credit, I don't know, whatever it is, part of their course, but it'll be, a deep dive into that city and that environment and that industry and that space. So we're looking at that now for things like the creative industries. How would we do that? Would that be in somewhere like LA, or would that be in Mumbai? Mumbai
Paris.
would be interesting, right, for that. So maybe we could do some partnerships there and set up a city seminar for the creative industries in Mumbai and do a week there. But that's not what business schools normally do.
Exactly.
That's
disruptive.
really, you don't get that at most business schools. It's an experiment, and you see if it works, and if it does, that's great, and you've got a new direction and a new path for your students. And if it doesn't, you move on and do something else.
Have you been part of any previous city seminars?
No, I'm just looking at it for the first time now, which is why it comes to mind, which is looking at this idea of a creative industry city seminar. Not that it's done, not that it's all organized or anything. We're still very much at the early stages, but it's just the kind of thing you have the opportunity to do here and to look at here that I don't think you get at most business schools.
Why not?
Because like any organization, most organizations, as I said, they value stability more than they value chaos. And, all businesses are, whether they like it or not, a combination of stability and chaos. They want stability, which is the process of continuity, of efficiency, of repeatability, of processes, of profitability, measurement, statistics. But they also live in a world where there's external forces and competition and innovation. And of course, the people who work for the organization are individuals with their individual lives. And their customers are individuals with emotions and thoughts. And so you're also dealing in this very chaotic environment at the same time. And it's balancing the chaos with the stability. And I think what most business schools do is they perhaps overemphasize the stability. So everything is very much the same as it was before, and everything is the same year on year. And you go and this is the lectures we do. And you even see, not so much in a good business school, but, to be honest, but in many business schools, the professors are kind of wheeling out the same thing they did last year and the year before, a little bit. And we just don't do that. We remake everything and reinvent everything. So what Hult does, I think, is understand the chaotic element of business, the innovation, the emotions, the culture, the novelty, and say, actually, we're going to bring that much more central to what we do compared with the majority of business schools out there, which frankly, is what makes it more fun, but also more relevant, because business is increasingly not as stable as it used to be. So in Hult, we are trying to give people that experience because that's closer to the experience they're going to find out there in the real world.
So what would you say this means for the next generation of businesses, of entrepreneurs who go to these business schools and then instead of learning about change with AI, with COVID coming, and I feel like now every single year it's something new. It's something how jobs are done, especially with AI evolving so much. In a couple of years, business schools just won't be able to keep up at all with the stability and will need to adapt change. So what does this actually mean for business in 5 years when these people graduate from the universities?
The biggest thing it means for us is to not just Hult, I mean for the sort of industry of sort of masters and undergrad business teaching generally, is to not teach causality, right? To not teach, if you do this, this will happen. You can end up like the sort of monkey shaking the tree and fruit falls down, right? I go shake the tree and fruit falls down. I shake the tree and fruit falls down. And one day you go and shake the tree and fruit doesn't fall down and you don't know what to do.
Exactly.
Right? And we cannot teach any longer a process by which, if you do this, that will happen, because we just do not know that. So we have to start teaching more, much more about how to negotiate humanity and the human interaction and the emotions of your customers and your staff, and then a process of change which is constant and that you are not going to go into a fixed situation. So almost we're teaching people how to think and how to engage with the principles of that, because we don't know what world they're going to go into in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, for all the reasons you say. So actually all you can do is prepare them to think in the right way so that when those changes happen, their expectations are set, that they know, okay, this is the change, this is how we deal with that, I'm okay with that, this is natural, this is normal, I'm going to go and negotiate that, right? Who do I need around me? What direction do we want to take? What information do I need? And from all of those things, end up with the ability to deal with the world as it really is. Whereas if you teach, this is the way to do this, and this is the way to do that, and, monkey see, monkey do kind of teaching, then, that frankly, you're going to have a lot of people graduate with 5-year-old knowledge that is no longer relevant. And I think that would be the greatest mistake. So our job has become much more about teaching people how to think and how to negotiate,
how to learn
humanity, and how to learn and how to develop, and much less about a set of actions that you should take.
So true, so true. On another note, I know, I just briefly want to touch upon this because, for example, AI and these new technologies are a big part of disruption. How do you think AI will change maybe in 5 to 10 years? If you had to make a prediction, how would you say it changes the world as we see it right now, as we've seen it for thousands of years? Because I would say it's one of the biggest changes we've had in a millennium.
To add on to that, I would like to add, how do you think it's going to affect the way of teaching, and do you think it's going to add even more pressure to the students?
No, firstly, to answer the second question first, I don't think it's going to add more pressure to students, no. I mean, 20, whatever it was, years ago, 25 years ago, when Google was first out, and I'm sure there were professors back then saying, oh my God, all my students are just going to be looking stuff up on Google, they won't go to libraries anymore, it's going to be a disaster. And of course now we don't even think about it, we just assume that everyone will use the internet and search engines and so forth. So I think it'll be the same with AI for students. And I think as professors, we have to just get used to the idea that we're not trying to, I personally anyway, I don't try to stop my students using ChatGPT or whatever. I want them to use it. It's a tool. Go use it. But then use it well and make a judgment and show me how you've used it and show me that you've got the correct, approach to that. And you've referenced it correctly, because that's important, he said, being a professor. It's not about not using it, it's about using it the right way. So no, I don't think students are going to find it more difficult. And to answer the first question, I think that the world is going to be, when I speak to executives, it's fantastic because they all say, AI, it's going to change the world, it's going to be such a big impact, and it's going to really revolutionize everything. And you're like, okay, great, yeah. And in what way is that going to change your organization? And they say, well, I don't know. I'm sure still trying to work it out. So I think the world is, look on YouTube, the world is full of people going, AI, it's going to be huge, but that's it. There's nothing more behind that. If you think about AI as being, in effect, a way to replace certain systematic and programmatic tasks, largely in reality, that currently industry is undertaking, then that will have a profound impact on certain kinds of role. And those roles are therefore going to require far fewer people in those roles, for example, call centers. And that is going to lead to, inevitably, unemployment and people having to find different ways to work and different things to do. And that could potentially have societal effects which are negative. You've got, in effect, people who own stocks and, percentages of business of one form or another, who own capital, who will benefit from that efficiency. But you've also got people who don't own those things and are living on wages, who will potentially be negatively affected by that, which could create a gap in society.
Yeah.
So those are that's the sort of dystopian negative view. But you've got then a more positive view that says, actually, that's going to free people up from doing some of the more boring parts of life. And actually, that will give them time for their side hustles and their more creative occupations. And actually, as human beings, maybe we weren't really designed to sit and do a repetitive piece of work. And if there's a piece of technology that will do that, we'll all go on and create value somewhere else. And I do prefer the second sort of interpretation, but I think we might have to go through the first one to get to the second one. I think, that period of disruption might be, painful for a while before we get to the point where actually, my life cannot consist just of doing repetitive tasks for money. Actually, my life, I could give all that to a machine, and I could focus on this much more interesting part of life. But that's down to the individual, and possibly will require a little time to get to.
Great. Now we have this little tradition at the end of each episode. We ask a guest for a question, off scene, and then that question is being used for the next guest. So we have a question for you.
Okay.
If this was the last day on Earth, what would you do?
Who was that guest? Was that Daniel?
It wasn't. It wasn't Daniel, because we do like Boston episodes as
Okay,
well.
okay,
But the previous one from London was Daniel. This was by Sofia Iguaran and Juan Camilo
Velasco.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, she's Spanish, so she.
Yeah. Okay. If this was my last day on Earth, what would I do? I think I would probably. I think this is the kind of thing that if it really happened to you, if one sort of knew that and you could make those decisions, I think some people think, oh, I just go mad and do all the crazy things. And, maybe if that's the case, you should do those things anyway, right? If your answer to that question is, I'd really like to, just sit and watch the sunset, then go, it doesn't need to be your last day on Earth to go and sit and watch the sunset, right? So I think I'd probably do the same thing I'd like to do every day, which is I'd probably spend that day with my family and my loved ones and friends. And what more could you want from your last day on Earth than that? And go and being crazy kind of. Have you seen movies like The Purge and things like that? Where it's everyone could just go mad. I don't think people would really. I think we'd all just go home and spend that time with the people we love the most, because otherwise what's life for, really? And I think that's what I would do. But I do absolutely think that everyone should have time doing whatever it is they would do on that day. Go and do anyway. Go and enjoy. Their life's too short to constantly be putting things off. So if there's something you wish you were done, I wish I had written that song, written that book, made that movie, taken that photograph, I always say, go do it. Go have that. Do it now. What the heck?
That's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for coming today, Alex.
A real pleasure. It was very, very nice to be here. What a exciting thing this is. So thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening, and we hope to catch you soon. Bye-bye.